Well, I do enjoy a great high fantasy story, but I'm also very intrigued by the idea of what if the dragon lived under the mall? We don't often think about what happens when you combine magic with like modern technology, and so that's always appealed to me. And also the idea that when you put fantasy into more of a real world setting, you're sort of dealing with characters who are in on a secret. Not everybody knows that this magical thing exists, and I had a lot of fun with that in last day of summer, because this is a town that's sort of set apart from the rest of the world, and the residents of the town know these secrets when nobody else does, and we're letting you all in on them.
Very similar. The town that my story takes place in is kind of the last place in the world where there are these magical elements, and so outside of it, everything's disappearing and everything's kind of coming there. So it's just, rather than high fantasy, I think that including those real elements grounds it more. And to me, as a kid, when I would read historical accounts of things, I would always just throw in, well, what if there was a love dragon? What if there were elves? What if there's magic? Like, how fun would that be? And so that's kind of the way that I like to take my writing, is the things I thought of when I was a kid, and that would be fun. Maybe other kids would like it too.
So Sophia, are dragons your favorite magical creature?
I like them a lot, yeah. I would say probably my favorite, but not like traditional dragons, like the dragon from like Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. Not a big fan of the mean ones. I like them like from How to Train Your Dragon, where they're nice and they're your friend and they kind of act like cats that fly around and breathe fire. My whole story was based off of Russian folklore from between the 9th and 14th centuries. So I wanted to make it appropriate for that time period. I really liked that setting, and I really like historical things. So I stuck it in the past because that's where my inspiration came from. That's where these characters lived, and I really wanted to do it historically. I like historical fantasy.
And I chose my setting because I grew up in Virginia, and I remember being very young, and the weekends I would spend with my cousins felt like magical adventures all the time. I so look forward to those Fridays and Saturday nights of riding bikes all across the town and imagining supernatural things happening. And I wanted to create that feeling again in the last day of summer, because I truly believe, like everyone out there probably has a friend, a cousin, or a sibling that they feel they go on adventures with and can easily relate to Otto and Sheed in the book.
So different.
Well, Otto and Sheed in the past, well, there's a little bit of time travel elements in the last day of summer. They don't necessarily go to the past, but it's not outside of the possibilities of what can happen in Logan County. So maybe that's something I'll have to actually explore on the page. I imagine that Otto and Sheed would cause a lot of trouble in the past, and those ripples could really affect all of us, so I'd have to be very careful there.
I've got a mean Viking in mind, and I feel like those aren't really around anymore, so I don't even know how I would do that in the present time. It would probably just include a lot more, just instead of having it be a Viking, it would be like a mean high school kid or something like that. I'd have to play with that a lot, but.
Or what if it was a modern day Viking adult? Like, what sort of a job would a modern Viking have to have nowadays? Maybe like the DMV?
Or something. A day trader.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, someone real intense.
Well, for me, I remember loving reading up to a certain age. And the last day of summer is targeted at that age, because I remember it wasn't that I stopped liking story, but I started to recognize I wasn't in any of those stories. So for me, it's important that Otto and Sheed are young black boys, because those are the characters I wanted to see so much when I was young. And I feel like there are probably kids today who want to see those characters. And even if it's not about them seeing themselves, other readers need to do what I had to do, which is explore stories from characters who aren't like them, and find that they can still have a good time. They can still enjoy what's happening even when those characters don't look like them, because marginalized children have had to do that since the dawn of reading. And so that's my motivation for telling the stories of these boys in this fantastical way.
Absolutely, same, because when I was a kid growing up, there's not a whole lot of happy Jewish stories for kids. There's not a lot of Jewish fantasy. And I really, as a kid, loved reading fantasy, and but none of it was me. And there's such a long and rich history of Jewish stories and folklore that no one ever touches upon. And so I really wanted to make that more commonplace, and I really wanted to bring that into my story. So my characters, there's Russian folklore, and there's also a lot of Jewish folklore that I feel like not a ton of people will even know what I'm talking about, which good. I want them to see that, and I want a little 10-year-old girl who was just like me when I was that age see these things and go like, she's just like me. Like, she's a happy ending. She made friends. You know, like that's all I wanted, was something that I had wished for as a kid. So I grew up and I wrote it.
Sophia,
for kids now.
Do you remember how old you were when you first saw someone like you in a book?
No, I don't.
I was probably 19 years old. And I remember it was probably a Walter Dean Myers book. And it just makes such a difference when you can see somebody who's like you in the stories you love.
Yeah, it means a lot to know that there is a happy ending for people like you. And so much of when I was a kid and reading books about a Jewish experience was the Holocaust. And those are really important stories, and they definitely need to be told, but there comes a point when you want to just read something happy, and you want to read a fantasy, and you can escape into it, and you have a great adventure, and then everybody gets together at the end and eats bread. And so that's what I wrote, because that's what I wanted. When I was little, I read a ton of fantasy, and I didn't really see anyone in those books who I thought reflected the experience that I wanted to see. And then when I read Jewish books, a lot of them are Holocaust, and those don't really have happy endings. And I really wanted a book that told the story of a Jewish character who had a happy ending, and who had adventures, and got to interact with fun fairy tale creatures instead of Nazis. So that's why I wanted to write it, and that's kind of how I went into it. Like, you know what? I'm going to write a Jewish character with a dragon, and there's a goat, and it's just, that's what I wanted to write, and the other people liked it too, so that's, there I am. So the book is about an 11-year-old Jewish farm girl, and it's set in the 10th century in Russia. So it's set a really long time ago. And she and her family are the only Jewish family in their village. And her father was conscripted, and he's gone at war, and the family's having a really hard time staying afloat. And one day, the village magistrate shows up, and he's demanding all this money, and he's saying he's going to take away their home and kick them out if they don't cough up a huge amount of money. And so Anya is my main character, and she decides, you know what, I'm gonna save my family, I'm gonna do this. So she teams up with this local family of fools to catch the last dragon in the country. But then the dragon saves her life, and she can't do it anymore. She can't catch him, she can't take him to be killed. So she has to save him, and she has to save her family. But how do you do that? So that's kind of that's her journey there, is figuring out how to save everybody at the same time. So it has been awesome so far. This is my very first book ever. I've never published anything before. I kind of didn't really know what to expect. And every time I turn around, something great is happening. And they have done something that I wasn't expecting. I had no idea, but it's like, oh wow, like they think of everything. And even just being here right now is something that I didn't expect to happen for a long time. And then I got an email one day from Kwame, and he was like, hey, come on down to ALA, and everybody's gonna be here, and it'll be fun. And that just kind of, wow, my book doesn't even come out for a few more months, and they already want me in with the team. And from day one, I felt like I was part of a family, and that's probably been the best part.
Well, I wrote a middle grade story because I remember that age being the age I started to fall out of love with reading, because I wasn't seeing characters that were like me. Up until that point, I loved fantasy stories of all kinds, but when I started to realize there weren't very many characters like me, I fell out of love, and I realized there are probably children right now feeling that same thing. So now that I have the opportunity to add to the genre, I wanted to add to the genre at that age so that there are kids who don't have to go through what I went through when I wasn't seeing myself in the stories I love. The Last Day of Summer stars the legendary Austin boys of the supernaturally weird Logan County. There's Otto, who's a lovable know-it-all, and then there's Sheed, who's sometimes cranky, but always cool. And they are tricked into freezing the last day of summer by the mysterious Mr. Flux, which unleashes a bunch of strange characters, and the boys have to either team up with those characters or battle them to save the day. It's sort of like if the Hardy Boys crashed into the Phantom Toll Booth. Working with Versify has been great. I can say the best way to describe it is I feel trusted. The Versify imprint has allowed me to tell a very strange story and has put ultimate faith in me as a storyteller to execute it. And I'm not sure that any other publisher would have given me that much freedom to work, but they really understand storytellers and they really got what I was trying to do. And it's been a really refreshing and freeing experience. My favorite thing to cook, so I cook a mean ribeye steak. And I'm talking I don't need a grill, I can do it on the stovetop. And I promise you, if you like steak, you're gonna love my ribeye. And if you do like steak, come on by, I'll cook one for you.
So Vamos, Let's Go to the Market was definitely inspired by my upbringing. I grew up in El Paso, Texas, but I also grew up in a city right across the border. We had to cross the bridge to get there. The name of the city was Juarez. And it was there that we would go on a daily basis on the weekends because, especially during summer, my mom helped out my grandparents and my aunts and uncles who all ran booths at the Mercado Cuauhtemoc. And so in this first book, Vamos, Let's Go to the Market, we get to follow little Lobo and his dog Burnaby as he goes to the market, and we get to see a lot of the same types of booths that I used to see when I was a little boy growing up.
My mom wrote a picture book about her grandfather's store.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, he had a store, and every Christmas he would do this thing called a penny party.
A penny what?
Penny party.
Okay.
He would throw bags of pennies, a bag of pennies in the air.
Yeah?
And kids would just
my
scrounge around trying to
goodness.
get pennies. Her book was called Papa's Penny Party.
That's hilarious.
So my mom was like my first inspiration for writing children's books because she had written one. The Undefeated, I started writing that poem in 2008 when President Obama was elected.
Okay.
And I wanted to write a poem for my daughter to show her the journey of Black Americans in particular, but Americans in general, and sort of how we've crossed over, how we've waded in the water, how we've sort of overcome challenges and obstacles and persevered and made our way to the promised land, as it were, to freedom. So The Undefeated is sort of a love letter to America.
So in both The Undefeated and Vamos, Let's Go to the Market, there are Easter eggs throughout both the narrative or the artwork that aren't explicitly explained. Why did you choose to drop hints for your readers? And what do you think is the effectiveness of the implicit cultural details?
The question is much more interesting than any answer.
Well, no, but you know what that makes me think is an Easter egg that I had completely overlooked on the cover of your book, and I'm just shocked that I overlooked this because it's such an important Easter egg.
44.
44, exactly.
On the front cover of The Undefeated are the numbers 44, or the number 44. And I didn't even notice it. I wrote the book. I've been seeing the illustrations for the past year. And I just noticed it like a week ago, that in the bottom left-hand corner is the number 44. And I almost don't want to tell you what it is, but so I'm not going to tell you.
It's definitely something that you could probably pop into your computer and that amazing.
I think you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
44.
So I do cook. I cook for my family, and what I love to make, or at least attempt to make, are the same kinds of dishes that I would run to my kitchen table to when I was a little boy growing up. And so I kind of try to make a lot of the same Mexican dishes that my mom would make when I was a little boy. So I love to make salsa because I can't have a meal without some spice in it, you know? I love to make huevos rancheros. I like to make pollo con arroz, enchiladas, tacos, burritos. I love making menudo and chicharrones, you name it. That's the kind of food that I like to have on my kitchen table. So Versify has been such an amazing team to work with. First and foremost, you are immediately captivated by the energy of Kwame Alexander, and that to me is a wonderful thing to be a part of. Secondly, you have an amazing team of professionals. I am very fortunate to work with Margaret Ramo, who is my editor, and just her guidance has been such a benefit to both my drawing and storytelling. So when I was a little boy growing up, I would head over to the library and I would search for books where I could see a reflection of myself. And I remember just going through the bookshelves, always pulling down books and wondering why the wonderful community that I inhabited was never illustrated or shown to me in the books that I was choosing. And so I just wanted to create a book that illustrated the wonderful place and the culture that I am. So the name of the book is Vamos, Let's Go to the Market, and I would say it's very much like a Richard Scarry Busytown book, except it's placed right in the border. And in this first book here, we get to visit the Mercado Cuauhtemoc, and we get to see all of the wonderful things that these vendors are selling. And they're not just the kinds of items that you would see like at a Walmart or a Target. And the reason why is because these items, for the most part, are made by hand. So you also get to see the wonderful artistry that goes into the making of, let's say, a jarro de barro, which is a jar made out of clay, and the beautiful patterning painted onto it. You get to see hand-carved masks. I remember very vividly my Tío Mario painting velvet Elvis paintings to sell at the Mercado, and you get to see, you get a peek at what that booth looks like. And so this book is, it's bilingual. There's plenty of Spanish peppered throughout the text. You get to, you're invited into the Mercado and you get a true sense of what it's like to visit a Mercado on a border town.
So poetry is so powerful for anything that is heavy. We can say more with fewer words, because sometimes you can just say one phrase and that's it. You've really said this really heavy, difficult thing, and you don't have to go through all the details. When it comes to history, especially, history repeats itself, so we don't want to make these same mistakes, and so people reading it now, the book now, are taking everything from the history and then bringing that forward. So they need the space to breathe and to be able to soak it in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like that extra white space, like it gives the character an opportunity to share their voice, and I feel like with difficult subjects in particular, voice is sort of the way you get through it, I feel like, and it gives the reader space to breathe, but it also gives the character space to breathe, and it makes it personal in that way. And so if you're dealing with something difficult, sometimes the abstract is like so intense that you need the personal anecdote, the voice of the character,
right,
in order to power through.
Mm-hmm. So in that case, I actually wrote it originally in prose as nonfiction years and years ago. Completely different story. I started from scratch years later. But for me, what was missing when I wrote it in prose was, as you said, the voice, the passion, and the emotion. Those things just weren't there. It was just kind of dry, and these are these facts, and it didn't have that personal connection, which I feel like verse really gives you that. Would you agree?
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, the idea for Emmy originated as an idea about, or an idea, as a novel in verse. I had never written a novel in verse before, but I felt like this book, it had to be written in verse or I couldn't write it. And that was because the idea came from, I was reading Andrea Davis Pinckney's book, The Red Pencil, and something about the way she uses colons and new lines and tabs, it reminded me of the coding language Python. And I realized this about halfway through the book, and I like put the book down and I went to go start writing because it blew my mind. I never thought of it before. I spent all my time writing code, I spent a lot of time writing, and I never realized how similar poetry and computer code are. They both use, they both imbue so much meaning into every character, every letter. If you have a single one-letter typo in code, your program won't even function.
And that can ruin a poem.
It can, exactly. If you have having an extra, or having a line break where you wouldn't expect it,
right?
It changes the poem. And so, I feel like my book couldn't have existed in poetry, and I feel like your book couldn't have existed in prose. I feel like your book couldn't have either. Yeah, I feel like Emmy in the Key of Code couldn't have been written in prose. It was created as an idea, as a novel in verse, to show how similar poetry and code is. And we think of code as being robotic and mechanical. We think of poetry as being lyrical and they both in some ways are, but they don't have to be. And there's more similarities than there are differences. And I wanted to show that.
Yeah, in my case, I've just always loved poetry, and I was talking to a couple of verse novelists for the literary journal I work for as a poetry editor, and they were telling me how verse novels are the perfect format for these tragic, emotional subjects. And I had written about the White Rose group before, and it hadn't worked out as nonfiction, but then when they were telling me this, and I love poetry, this poetry can do this, and it was these light bulbs going off in my head, and I knew that was the perfect format for White Rose, and I started working on it the next day.
And I think with both of our books, people sometimes think of history as being dry, or they think of
just like code, right?
Exactly.
It's like, but they're wrong.
But they're wrong, and like in poetry, kind of breathes life into these subject matters that could be considered boring, but they're not.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. I feel like kids, when they're young, are taught that these subjects are so separate, that we learn English in English class, and music in music class, and math in math class. And it wasn't until, honestly, after college that I realized that not only are they not completely siloed, but there's not a single thing you can do in your life that is just one of these subjects. And so I want kids to take away from this that code is beautiful, and music is beautiful, and poetry is beautiful, and that they are more similar than they are different. And another thing that I played piano for 11 years, I sang for 6 years, and so my relationship with music has changed over the course of my life, and my relationship with code has changed over the course of my life, and my relationship with poetry has changed over the course of my life. And I've gone through phases where, I felt like I wasn't good enough at music to pursue it, or I was so good at code that I had to pursue it. And I think what's something that I hope that kids take away from Emmy is that you might abandon something at one point in your life only to rediscover it in a different way later. And there's a moment where Emmy starts to play music using code. And that idea actually didn't come until later in my drafting process for the book, but I felt like it was the heart of my story. I felt like it was the moment where she realized that she had music in her the whole time, and she just had to discover how to bring it out. Emmy in the Key of Code is a story, it's sort of like the crossover, but about code. It's about a girl named Emmy who comes from a family of musicians, and she loves music, but she's not very good at actually creating it. And so she moved to San Francisco with her parents because her dad has a new job as the backup pianist for the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra. And she decides, enough is enough. I am no longer taking music classes. I am going to take computer science. And she ends up falling in love with it the way that she wished she always had with music. And she makes friends in the class, and she loves her teacher. But she realizes rather quickly that being a girl in computer science isn't always easy. And between secrets coming out from her best friend and something even that the teacher's hiding, her newfound sense of home starts to crumble rather quickly. I'm such a fangirl for Versify. When I was writing Emmy, I was modeling it after the crossover, sort of using it as a mentor text. And when I was writing it, Versify, the New York Times article about Versify dropped, and all of a sudden I had 3 different friends messaging me. They're like, "You have to publish Emmy with Versify," and I was like, "I hope they'll take me." And so, honestly, it's kind of a dream come true to be with Versify, and I'm like, it's just amazing to know that I'm working with all these talented writers, and I'm working with Kwame, and I love my editor, and it's just, honestly, it's a total dream come true.
Well, I first heard about the White Rose in a high school German class, and I was immediately captivated by this group, these kids, not much older than I was, who stood up to the Nazis. And for many years after that, 10, 20 years, a long time, I am old. I read everything I could about them. I saw the films I could find about them. I went to Germany to see where they lived, to go to the university they attended, to visit the archives and see the handwritten papers that my protagonist, Sophie Scholl, wrote and drew. And every single piece I discovered of her puzzle, the more I wanted to know. And I just finally had to start writing about it because I had gathered enough information, and I had to get their story out there. So White Rose is based on a true story, and it's about Sophie Scholl, who was a German student. One of the lines from the leaflets that they wrote against the Nazis was, "Every word that comes out of Hitler's mouth is a lie." And we all know this sort of thing goes on today, that people talk about this sort of thing, but this was high treason to say something like this in World War II in Nazi Germany. And this group didn't care. They wanted to get the word out. They wanted to share their thoughts and their beliefs with the rest of Germany and get their country turned onto the right track. Well, young people are always at the core of social change. They are passionate. They want things to go right. And Sophie Scholl's story is in the past, but kids today can take her determined example of following her conscience and standing up for others and do the same thing. And I really hope they do. They take that example from the past and use it to go forward in their lives today to say, I'm not going to let people push other people around. This is the best question. It's just, Versify is so awesome. And the whole team is amazing. Kwame, okay, so if you write verse and you write poetry and you love poetry in verse, and you wanted to pick one person off the top of your head who you'd love to work with, I mean, it's Kwame. And so finding out that, so I was, as part of the initial group, we didn't even know that it was like all secret, so finding out that there was going to be this Versify imprint and that I was going to be part of it was just amazing, and it's been great from start till right now, and I assume it's going to be as amazing as we go forward.